My husband left me for an online flame and returned 8 years later with a proposal. My husband abandoned me for a stunning woman he met online and vanished for 8 years. Now, he claims to have an offer for me. At 40 years old, I'm finding it challenging to comprehend the recent decision I've made concerning my family, and I would like to seek the opinions of those around me. I'll begin by sharing that my life was turned upside down 8 years ago when my husband, David, unexpectedly declared that he was leaving me and our children. He had met an attractive woman named Elena on the internet and fell deeply in love with her. His decision came as a complete shock, leaving me utterly confused. David had been acting distant and unlike his usual self for several weeks before his departure, but I attributed it to work-related stress. We had been married for over a decade, supporting each other through every circumstance. I had known David for half of my life, and together we had built a loving family. The idea of his infidelity had never even crossed my mind. One evening, David finally confessed that he had met someone else. Those words shattered my heart. He revealed that her name was Elena and described her as the most captivating woman he had ever seen. They had been communicating for the past 3 months and had grown so close that he realized he was unhappy in our marriage. Every word he spoke felt like a dagger, and a tumultuous mix of anger and despair raged within me. He continued to assure me that he still loved me and our children, but couldn't deny his feelings for Elena. He insisted that he needed to meet her in person to determine if there was a future for them together. I was overwhelmed with a whirlwind of emotions and couldn't grasp what was happening. It felt as though the walls of our home were closing in on me. With a trembling voice, I asked him if he was leaving me and our children for this woman. He slowly nodded, explaining that although he didn't expect me to understand, he needed to do this for himself. He said he had carefully considered this decision and was planning to meet her to start a new life. He mentioned that he was willing to support us financially as much as he could, but needed to follow his heart and pursue the love of his life. My world crumbled. I couldn't believe that my husband was leaving me and our children for a woman he hadn't even met in person. Initially, I wanted to scream and beg him to stay, but as I looked into his eyes, I realized he had already made his choice, and there was no turning back. David moved out the following week, leaving me to explain to our children that their father would not be returning. 10-year-old Lily had countless questions, but I had no answers. 5-year-old Ethan couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what was happening and looked at me as if he sensed something terrible had occurred. During this time, I felt empty and broken, and only my children kept me from completely sinking into grief. When I first shared the news about David leaving, others reacted similarly to how I felt. They couldn't understand how my husband, after so many years together, could act this way. My parents encouraged me to go to court, but at that moment, I lacked both the strength and the grounds for it, and I still held on to the belief that David would return. David's parents appeared utterly helpless and devastated upon learning that their son had abandoned us. They called him numerous times, begging him to come back, but he told them the same story he told me. Eventually, days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. I had to piece my life together for myself and the children. Our family and friends surrounded us with support and offered their help during these challenging times. I focused on finding a job to create stable conditions for Lily and Ethan, but the pain of my husband's betrayal never faded. Throughout all this, David's parents were incredibly supportive, providing financial assistance and looking after us when I needed a break. 8 years have passed, and David's presence in our lives has become nothing more than a distant memory. He occasionally sent money, but that was the extent of his connection with us. He never contacted me or the children again. Over these years, I effectively became a single mother, working tirelessly to provide for my children and surround them with the love and attention they deserved. Although Lily sometimes remembered her father she eventually stopped trying to contact him and learned not to mention him. Ethan was much younger when his father left and never spoke about him. Despite the pain of loss, both of us grew up to be wonderful individuals. Recently, David suddenly passed away, and we all attended his funeral. Later, the family lawyer informed me that he would like to talk to me about the will. The lawyer explained that David's father had left a certain amount of money to his grandchildren. Although it wasn't a huge sum, the money could help cover the children's college education expenses. I shared the news with the children that they wouldn't have to worry about their education costs anymore. Their faces lit up with joy, and seeing their happiness was truly touching. It felt like a big weight had finally been lifted from our shoulders after a long period of uncertainty. Everything was finally starting to fall into place. Last week, I received a call from an unknown number. To my surprise, David was on the other end of the line. A wave of conflicting emotions overwhelmed me, and I lost my voice upon hearing his voice after 8 years. He hesitated before saying that he wanted to meet with me urgently. In confusion, I asked him to clarify what it was about. He admitted that he wanted to discuss some proposal with me and continued to beg me for a meeting. I couldn't understand why he was calling me now, after so many years. His persistent request was hard to ignore, so I took a moment to gather my thoughts and eventually cautiously agreed to meet him alone. We decided to meet at a cafe near my workplace. After hanging up, a whirlwind of questions and doubts swirled in my head, leaving me anxiously awaiting our first meeting after so many years. I decided not to tell the children anything initially to understand what kind of proposal their father was so insistent on discussing. The days leading up to our meeting were emotional roller coasters. I couldn't stop replaying the past in my mind, recalling the pain of David's sudden departure, the difficulties of raising the children alone, and the long years of trying to come to terms with his absence. So, I arrived early and nervously paced while waiting. After some time, he walked in, approaching me with an expression of hesitation and determination. I noticed that he looked older, worn out, and somehow not at all like the man I married. At first, our conversation was filled with awkward pauses and cautious words. We avoided the main topic, focusing instead on polite greetings and talking about the past years. At some point, David gathered his courage and began explaining the reason for his unexpected return to our lives. He said that Elena turned out to be nothing like the woman he had imagined her to be. It turned out she was also a single mother, but had been hiding that fact until after he left us. Their relationship faced numerous difficulties, primarily due to her gambling addiction, which caused financial problems. They often quarreled, but David decided to stay with her, not wanting to leave someone again. However, after the recent death of his father, he realized how short life is to remain unhappy. Every day, he thought about how much he missed me and the children and regretted the choice he made 8 years ago. David continued, saying that over the years, he had often thought about returning to us but lacked the courage to meet us face to face. Then he revealed that his father had bequeathed him their large beach house, where we used to vacation as a family before David left us. He said he wanted to sell the house to secure a comfortable life for himself. I listened to him silently, nodding. Then David stunned me with an unexpected statement. He offered to come back to us and provide our children with a luxurious life. He assured me that I would never have to work again if I accepted him back into our lives. I looked at him in disbelief as he continued to convince me that we could spend the rest of our lives without worrying about money. Essentially, David wanted us to give our family a second chance by using his father's inheritance to create a better life. I carefully considered his words, understanding the potential benefits that the inheritance could bring to our family. However, forgetting all the years of his absence, when I struggled alone for the children, was simply impossible. Despite the idea of financial stability being tempting, I couldn't ignore the pain and anger that had built up within me over all these long years of his absence. Therefore, I firmly told David that although I appreciated his offer, I just couldn't forget the past 8 years. I told him that all this time, I had been raising the children alone while also working, and that, although we don't have everything we could dream of, we have a stable life. I told him that I didn't want to risk subjecting myself and my children to pain again. I wanted to protect them, and wasn't sure if I could ever trust him enough to be certain he wouldn't leave us again. David continued to beg me to reconsider my decision. His eyes were full of despair, but I knew that if I allowed him back into our lives, I would jeopardize our family's stability. My heart ached a little at the thought of rejecting his offer, especially considering that he could solve all our financial problems. But I couldn't ignore the emotional wounds he had left behind. Since meeting David, my parents had been asking me to reconsider my decision and accept his offer. They kept telling me that the least he could do now was to provide a better life for me and our children, free from financial worries and limitations. My parents insisted that people can change, and that perhaps David had realized his mistakes and genuinely wanted to restore our family. They believed I was being selfish and should prioritize my children's comfort over my own emotional pain. For the past few days, I haven't been able to sleep, struggling with my choice. I can't bring myself to tell the children about David's return. I'm worried about how they will react to this news, and how they will perceive the idea that their father might re-enter their lives after 8 years of absence. I continue to doubt whether I made the right decision, torn between the potential benefits of accepting David's proposal and the memories of our painful past. So, am I wrong for rejecting David's offer and possibly depriving my children and myself of a better life? Update 1. Just a few days ago, I received thousands of comments and messages from people. I'm glad to know that most of you don't consider me guilty. I listened to your advice and decided that it was time to have an open conversation with the children about David. The last thing I wanted was for him to suddenly appear in their lives and take them by surprise. Today, after dinner, I sat down with Lily and Ethan and began telling them about their father's unexpected return and his proposal to come back into our lives. Their faces showed a mix of curiosity and confusion as they tried to understand what I was talking about. When I told them that David had inherited the beach house and wanted to sell it to help us financially, their reactions were varied. Lily, now 18, displayed a wide range of emotions from anger to shock. She was as confused as I was, and couldn't understand why David decided to return to us after so many years. Although she remembered her father and sometimes missed him, she also remembered the pain she felt when he left us. She said that initially, she missed having a father figure in her life, but over time, she learned to live without him and no longer wants him to return. Ethan, now 13, said he doesn't remember David at all, so he doesn't care that I rejected his offer. He struggled to understand the full consequences of the situation. I honestly told them that I would accept whatever decision they made because I respect their opinions. Lily stated that she absolutely does not want to meet him, and Ethan agreed, saying he is happy with how things are now. At that moment, I realized that although the idea of possibly restoring our family was tempting, the wounds of the past were too deep, and my children's well-being was my top priority. I knew I had made the right decision to leave David that day at the cafe. Update 2. Over the past few weeks, David's calls became increasingly desperate. Despite all my explanations that I didn't want him to return, he kept calling like someone avoiding conflicts. I felt cornered and emotionally drained by his constant attempts to contact me. I was worried he might suddenly show up at my workplace or come to the children's school. Therefore, I decided to reach out to his mother, who knew about his return and seemed like the only person who could help me understand his motives and deal with him. I met with her to inform her of my decision to sever ties with David and express my dissatisfaction with his constant calls. During this conversation, His mother revealed the true reason for his persistence. She explained that David's father had added a clever clause to the will when he left him the beach house. David could only inherit the house if he returned to our family. To secure his right to the house, I also needed to sign the relevant documents. This revelation shocked me and made me feel disgusted. Finally, I understood why he had been so insistent on contacting me over the past few weeks. The main reason for his reaching out was not a sincere desire to reconcile or atone for his actions, but a desire to obtain the house. The whole story seemed like a cruel manipulation of emotions, and I needed to carefully consider my next steps. Upon learning David's true intentions, I realized it was time to act. At the time of writing this update, I had already started looking for a lawyer to prepare the divorce documents. I also spoke with my parents, who now regret advising me to consider David's offer. They understand that he hasn't changed over the years and support my decision to finally divorce him. They regret even suggesting that I listen to him, and now know that leaving him was the right choice. At the moment, I have blocked David so he can no longer bother me. I plan to meet him in person to hand him the divorce documents. Update 3. 2 months have passed since the last update, and now I can share some good news. As I mentioned, I was planning to hand David the divorce documents, so I asked him to meet with me. He agreed immediately. Lily and Ethan expressed a desire to see their father one last time. They had many questions for him, and I felt it was important for them to get answers to close this chapter despite the pain of the past. We agreed to meet in a neutral place, a local park where we had once spent many happy moments as a family before David left. When David arrived, Lily's eyes were full of a mix of curiosity and skepticism as she looked at her father awkwardly standing beside me. From the start, I told David that I knew the real reason why he decided to return to us after so much time. David argued that the matter wasn't only about his father's will but also that he genuinely wanted a second chance for our family. I shook my head, realizing that I could no longer believe a single word he said. I told him that for us, it was all over and that the least he could do was answer our children's questions. He nodded. Lily was the first to ask him if it was worth leaving us for another woman. David shamefully lowered his gaze and admitted that he was lost, had made a terrible mistake, and deeply regretted his decision. Ethan, approaching the matter more directly, asked if his personal life was more important than the family he had abandoned. David sighed deeply before responding that he hadn't thought clearly at the time and admitted that he was wrong to leave us. My children are perceptive and strong. They were not satisfied with such answers. David tried to justify his infidelity, calling it a midlife crisis. He then shared painful details about his life with Elena, the difficulties they faced, and his realization that he was chasing an illusion. Lily and Ethan listened attentively, although I doubt they believe him. They asked why he never tried to contact them, and if he truly regretted leaving us. I felt the pain in my children's voices as David confessed that he was plagued by guilt and didn't know how to cope with the consequences of his actions. He repeated that he wanted us to become a family again and that he could now provide us with a luxurious life. Looking into my children's eyes, I realized the decision was obvious. They didn't believe him, just like I didn't, and they wouldn't allow David to re-enter our lives so easily by offering money as compensation for the harm he caused. It was a matter of principle. With complete determination, I told David that we had already left him in the past, and that we didn't need him or his money. I handed him the divorce documents while he looked at them with expressions of remorse and disappointment. He begged me, insisting that he genuinely wanted to atone for these years, but I remained steadfast in my decision. Then David offered to split the proceeds from the sale of the beach house with me, claiming that this way we could both benefit. But Lily immediately objected, saying that we didn't need his charitable money. Ethan nodded in agreement, adding that we already have everything we need for happiness. At that moment, it seemed to me that David finally realized the huge mistake he had made. He began to cry, claiming that he was sorry to the children. He admitted that he had made a terrible mistake by leaving us and understood that we would never forgive him. That day, when I left the park holding Lily and Ethan's hands, I felt free for the first time. I suddenly realized the burden I had been carrying for my children. It was comforting to see my children defend and support me. Our divorce was finalized. I know it will take time to officially be free from David, but for now, I plan to take a break to spend time with the children. We are going to Disneyland, a trip we have long awaited. I want to create happy memories with my children filled with laughter and joy to overshadow the painful moments of the past. I am confident that as long as we are together, we can overcome any difficulties the future may hold. Despite all the trials and emotional upheavals we faced, my children and I are on the path to healing and creating a new stable life. This chapter is still far from over, but now we will be writing our own story, and I intend to make it a story full of love and trust. Update 4. Since my last update, I have some amazing news to share. I was promoted at work, which is a huge achievement for me. It took a lot of time and effort, but now I earn enough to provide for my family. The promotion not only brings financial stability, but also the satisfaction of knowing that my hard work and dedication have paid off. As for the divorce proceedings, things are going well. I hired an excellent lawyer who, having studied the history of my relationship with my husband, is confident that the process will go smoothly. My family and friends have supported me all this time. Now that I earn enough, I plan to send my children to therapy. I understand that they may have issues related to feelings of abandonment, and therapy will help them better cope with their emotions and overcome any residual trauma. I carefully explored options and found an experienced psychotherapist who specializes in working with children and families. In the meantime, as a parent, I strive to develop my children's interests outside of their studies. My daughter, Lily, has an outstanding talent for drawing and spends hours creating beautiful paintings that decorate our home. My son, Ethan, has always had a natural talent for soccer, and on weekends, we attend his games and support him. I am proud of my children. As for David, we have no contact, and I believe it is for the best. As many of you correctly guessed, his lover, Elena, unexpectedly reached out to me. However, her message was not an apology, as one might expect. Instead, it was filled with anger, resentment, and blame towards me for supposedly taking David away from her. She accused me of causing their breakup and claimed that I was the reason he left. In her messages to our family, Elena lashed out, and these messages were aggressive and alarming. I couldn't help but feel shaken by her rage. It was hard for me to believe that this woman had the audacity to be angry with me when she was the one who caused my family to break apart 8 years ago. I replied to her that I had no desire to be with David and that I was in the process of divorcing him. I reminded her of the pain and betrayal my family endured when David left us for her, and stated that she had no right to talk to me. I emphasized how our lives were turned upside down and how my children suffered because of her. I made it clear that I never wanted David to return and that if anyone needed to be blamed, it should be her and her gambling addiction. I blocked her after sending this message and hope that she will no longer try to contact me. I don't want her to disrupt the peace that my children and I have built. Regarding David's mother, I occasionally communicate with her since she has always been kind to me. She expressed regret over how everything turned out and wishes me happiness. Interestingly, she also revealed that because of my decision not to restore the relationship with David, he won't inherit the beach house as initially intended in his father's will. This revelation was unexpected, although fairly deserved. It's only fair that David faces the consequences of his actions. I know it will be a difficult path, but the healing process has already begun. My children are growing and thriving, and with each passing day, our future becomes brighter. So, be sure to leave your opinions in the comments about what you think of this story. I'm also very curious about how you would handle this situation. Honestly, I'm not sure if I would have refused that house, or at least half of it. I'm also not sure if I would have refused if I were a child, especially in the place of this 18-year-old girl. After all, at 18 years old, you're already moving away from your parents. Yes, it's clear that the father is a jerk, but why not take half of that beach house from him as a final gesture? In general, you can consider me 10 times mercenary. Again, I emphasize that I don't know how I would have acted in this situation, but maybe I would have accepted the offer after all. In general, write your opinion. At the expense of this story, you can also share yours in the comments. It will be interesting to read. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Your support is very important to me. Take care of yourself.